Hello and welcome. In this video, we'll explore the key conflicts that shaped American history, and we'll go over some fascinating facts, notable figures, and critical moments. Section 1. The Road to Revolution. Before the thunder of muskets echoed through Lexington and Concord, before Washington donned his commander's uniform, the stage was being set for a revolution. The journey to American independence did not begin with a battle. It began with ideas, taxes, boycotts, protests, and years of mounting frustration. In the early 1700s, life in the American colonies was shaped by both opportunity and oversight. British America was a world of bustling port cities, growing plantations, tight-knit rural communities, and expanding frontier settlements. The colonies were under British rule, but largely self-governing. Colonial assemblies created laws, managed budgets, and oversaw local militias. People hunted, farmed, traded, and worshipped freely, but always under the distant eye of the crown. As the 18th century progressed, the distance between the colonists and their British rulers became more than geographical. British victories in the 7 Years' War, known in America as the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763, eliminated French threats on the continent. But the war came with a price. Britain's national debt had nearly doubled. Seeking revenue, Parliament turned its eyes toward the colonies. The Sugar Act of 1764 and the Stamp Act of 1765 were the first major attempts to tax the colonies directly. For the colonists, these were not merely taxes. They were affronts to their autonomy. The rallying cry, "No taxation without representation," echoed through taverns, churches, and town halls. In cities like Boston and New York, resistance flared. Protests turned to riots, effigies of tax collectors burned, and in response, colonial leaders organized. The Sons of Liberty, a radical group of patriots, emerged as defenders of colonial rights. Men like Samuel Adams, John Hancock, and Paul Revere used speeches, newspapers, and public demonstrations to galvanize resistance. British merchants, caught in the economic backlash of colonial boycotts, pressured Parliament to repeal the Stamp Act in 1766. Yet relief was short-lived. In 1767, the Townshend Acts reignited tensions. Tariffs on glass, paper, paint, and tea, luxury goods for many colonists, infuriated the public. British troops were stationed in American cities to enforce order. To many, the redcoats were no longer protectors. They were occupiers. The streets of Boston became the crucible of conflict. On March 5, 1770, British soldiers opened fire on a mob of colonists. 5 men died in what became known as the Boston Massacre. The event was seared into American memory by Paul Revere's inflammatory engraving, portraying innocent colonists slaughtered by ruthless soldiers. Tensions simmered but did not boil over, yet. For 3 years, an uneasy calm persisted. Then, in 1773, the British passed the Tea Act, granting the East India Company exclusive rights to sell tea in America. It wasn't the price, it was the principle. Colonists saw it as another ploy to force acceptance of unfair laws. On the night of December 16, 1773, a group of colonists boarded British ships in Boston Harbor and dumped 342 chests of tea into the icy water. The Boston Tea Party, as it would come to be known, was a bold act of defiance. Britain responded with fury. The coercive acts, called the Intolerable Acts in the colonies, closed the port of Boston, restricted local government, and allowed British officials accused of crimes to be tried in Britain. Instead of isolating Boston, these acts united the colonies in sympathy and outrage. In 1774, the First Continental Congress met in Philadelphia. For the first time, delegates from 12 colonies gathered to present a unified response. Among them, George Washington, Patrick Henry, and John Adams. They called for a boycott of British goods and prepared militias to defend colonial rights. Still, many hoped for reconciliation. Letters were sent to King George III, affirming loyalty but demanding justice. But in London, the King and Parliament saw only rebellion. Meanwhile, in Massachusetts, British General Thomas Gage prepared to seize colonial weapons stored in Concord. On April 18, 1775, colonial riders, most famously Paul Revere, galloped through the countryside warning, "The British are coming." At dawn on April 19th, colonial militiamen stood on the green at Lexington. A shot rang out, its origin unknown, but its consequences would echo through history. The American Revolution had begun. These opening shots were not merely the beginning of a war. They were the culmination of decades of tension, of broken trust, of dreams deferred. The colonies, once proud to call themselves British subjects, now marched toward independence. As we move forward, we'll follow the battles, the heroes, the betrayals, and the sacrifices that followed. But remember, it all began with attacks and the refusal to surrender liberty. Section 2. The Fires of War. The battles of the Revolutionary War unfolded across the varied landscapes of the 13 colonies. Fields, forests, hills, rivers. And through these terrains, the cause of independence marched forward with fire and fury. The war's first full confrontation erupted in April 1775. At Lexington, Massachusetts, 77 Minutemen stood on the village green, staring down a British force nearly 10 times their number. The British unleashed a volley, and within minutes, 8 colonists lay dead. The Redcoats pressed on to Concord, but faced fierce resistance. At North Bridge, American militia returned fire with deadly accuracy. The British were forced into a chaotic retreat back to Boston, harried by militia firing from woods and stone walls. The legend of the citizen soldier was born. In June, George Washington took command of the Continental Army, headquartered in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Only weeks later, Americans would face a brutal test: the Battle of Bunker Hill. On June 17, 1775, colonial forces entrenched on Breed's Hill faced a full frontal assault by British troops. Twice the Redcoats charged uphill and were repelled. Only after colonial ammunition ran low did they break through on the third charge. Though technically a British victory, it came at a massive cost, over 1,000 casualties. The psychological blow proved worse. The British had learned the colonial militia would not be easily crushed. Over the next year, both sides regrouped. The Americans laid siege to Boston. Then, in March 1776, they achieved a stunning feat. Fortifying Dorchester Heights with cannons hauled from Fort Ticonderoga by Henry Knox, Washington forced the British to evacuate Boston entirely. Yet the war was far from over. In August 1776, British forces returned with overwhelming strength, over 30,000 men, to crush the rebellion in New York. The Battle of Long Island was a crushing defeat for the Americans. Washington's army narrowly escaped across the East River under cover of night and fog, a daring retreat that saved the Revolution. That winter, morale plummeted, soldiers deserted, supplies dwindled. But on Christmas night, 1776, Washington staged a surprise attack that reignited hope. He led a daring crossing of the icy Delaware River, striking Hessian troops in Trenton, New Jersey. The victory was followed by another at Princeton. These audacious moves turned the tide, not just militarily, but emotionally. The American cause found breath again. The campaign of 1777 brought both challenges and triumph. British General John Burgoyne launched a campaign from Canada, hoping to isolate New England. But at Saratoga, New York, his advance stalled. In a series of bloody engagements, American forces under Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold defeated Burgoyne's army. Saratoga was a watershed moment. It convinced France that the Americans could win. In 1778, France formally entered the war, bringing a navy, troops, supplies, and global legitimacy. That winter, the Continental Army encamped at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. The conditions were dire: cold, disease, and near starvation. But from the suffering emerged a hardened, unified force. Baron von Steuben, a Prussian military officer, drilled the men in European tactics, discipline, and formations. The army that emerged from Valley Forge was no longer a band of militias. It was a continental force. As the war shifted south, a brutal new chapter unfolded. The British captured Savannah and Charleston, expecting loyalist support. But instead, they faced fierce guerrilla warfare. Patriots like Francis "Swamp Fox" Marion Thomas Sumter and Nathaniel Greene launched hit-and-run strikes, disrupting British lines and sapping their strength. In 1781, British General Cornwallis moved north into Virginia, shadowed by American and French forces. He fortified Yorktown, believing British naval superiority would protect him. He was mistaken. The French fleet, under Admiral de Grasse, blockaded the Chesapeake Bay. Washington, coordinating with French General Rochambeau, marched his army over 400 miles in secrecy to surround Yorktown. From October 6 to 19, 1781, American and French troops bombarded British positions. Trenches crept closer each night. On October 14, Alexander Hamilton led a daring nighttime assault to capture Redoubt 10. With supply lines cut and no escape, Cornwallis surrendered on October 19. Yorktown was the final major battle. Though peace negotiations dragged on for nearly 2 years, the war was effectively over. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris formally recognized American independence. The dream of liberty, born in protest, forged in battle, and sealed at Yorktown, had become reality. The Revolutionary War was not a single clash. It was a mosaic of courage, suffering, sacrifice, and transformation. Ordinary people became warriors, farmers became soldiers, and a collection of colonies became the United States of America. As we continue our journey through American conflicts, remember the names: Lexington, Bunker Hill, Trenton, Saratoga, Yorktown. They were not just battles, they were turning points in the struggle for freedom. Section 3: Voices of the Revolution. Beyond the battlefield, other forces shaped the revolution: spies, civilians, diplomacy, and dreams deferred. Let's now explore the lives and legacies behind the lines. The American Revolution was not won by armies alone. It was fought in drawing rooms and churches, in forests and on front porches. At the heart of this complex tapestry were the people, the thinkers, the dreamers, the overlooked, and the courageous. Let's begin with the architects of rebellion, the Founding Fathers. While many think of them as marble figures on pedestals, they were real men with divergent visions and fierce convictions. George Washington's steadiness as commander-in-chief held the army together through storms of doubt. Thomas Jefferson, with pen in hand, immortalized Enlightenment ideals in the Declaration of Independence. John Adams, ever outspoken, tirelessly pushed for independence in Congress and helped secure vital foreign alliances. Yet they often disagreed. Hamilton and Jefferson sparred over the nature of government. Adams feared the radicalism Jefferson embraced. The politics of revolution were as complex as any battlefield maneuver. Meanwhile, in the shadows, spies played a pivotal role. The Culper spy ring, organized under Washington's direction, operated in New York, smuggling intelligence through coded letters and secret couriers. Men like Abraham Woodhull and women like Anna Strong risked execution every day they passed messages under the noses of the British. Espionage wasn't just dramatic, it was decisive. Intelligence helped Washington avoid ambushes, plan counter-moves, and mislead enemy forces. The silent war of secrets was critical to victory. And what of the women? Though denied formal leadership, women fueled the revolution's soul. Deborah Sampson disguised herself as a man to fight in the Continental Army. Mercy Otis Warren wielded her pen with the sharpness of a sword, crafting propaganda and political satire. Molly Pitcher, a nickname given to several brave women, delivered water and even manned cannons during battle. Back home, women managed farms, businesses, and households, keeping families alive while husbands and sons went to war. Their sacrifices were rarely recorded, but their impact was immense. The revolution also fractured Native American communities. Some tribes, like the Iroquois Confederacy, split in allegiance, brother fighting brother. Many sided with the British, who had promised to limit colonial expansion. But others, such as the Oneida, supported the Americans. Regardless of their choice, Native Americans suffered displacement, betrayal, and devastation. After the war, their hopes for sovereignty were dashed, as westward expansion surged unchecked. The American Revolution, for them, was often a prelude to deeper losses. Enslaved Africans also played complex roles in the conflict. Both sides offered freedom in exchange for service. Lord Dunmore's proclamation in 1775 promised liberation to slaves who fled their patriot masters and joined the British. Thousands took this chance, some fighting, others serving in support roles. The Americans, too, enlisted free black men and sometimes promised freedom to slaves. The 1st Rhode Island Regiment, for example, included many African American soldiers who fought valiantly at battles like Newport and Yorktown. Yet when the war ended, many promises were broken. Freedmen faced re-enslavement, exile, or discrimination. Still, their contributions laid the early foundations for future struggles toward freedom. Ordinary citizens, blacksmiths, printers, farmers, teachers shaped the political will of a nation in the making. They debated in town halls, wrote editorials, and formed committees of correspondence. They read Thomas Paine's Common Sense, and in its pages they found not only rebellion but identity. Revolution meant different things to different people. To some it was a break from tyranny, to others a chance for reinvention. But for all it demanded courage and cost. As muskets roared in the fields, voices rose in newspapers, pulpits, and parlors. The political fabric of America, its constitution, its liberties, its civic culture, was spun not only from blood, but from words, ideas, and acts of quiet defiance. This was the revolution behind the revolution. Our revolution was fought not just with bullets, but with secrets, alliances, and ideals. Now we turn to the diplomatic and naval forces that tilted the balance and the global echoes that still ripple today. Section 4: Secrets, Seas, and Diplomacy. Our revolution was fought not just with bullets, but with secrets, alliances, and ideals. Now we turn to the diplomatic and naval forces that tilted the balance and the global echoes that still ripple today. In the 18th century, naval dominance was power, and during the American Revolution, the sea became a second battlefield. Early in the war, the Continental Navy was almost non-existent. Yet with bold leadership and strategic use of privateers, the American resistance took its fight to the oceans. John Paul Jones, a name etched in maritime legend, captained the Bonhomme Richard in one of the most iconic naval battles of the war. In 1779, off the coast of England, he engaged the British warship HMS Serapis. Outgunned and taking fire, Jones refused to surrender. His immortal cry, "I have not yet begun to fight," became a rallying call. Against all odds, he triumphed, capturing the Serapis. His victory stunned Britain and proved that American resolve was not confined to land. Unable to rival the Royal Navy ship for ship, Americans embraced privateering, authorizing civilian vessels to attack British trade ships. These privateers disrupted supply chains, captured valuable goods, and drained British resources. Over 1,700 privateer ships would eventually sail under letters of marque, capturing nearly 2,000 British vessels during the war. On land, American diplomats fought a quieter war. Benjamin Franklin, sent to France, navigated the delicate art of court politics. Wearing his fur hat and plain clothes, he charmed the French elite. But behind the smiles were months of careful persuasion, strategy, and correspondence. Franklin, along with John Adams and Arthur Lee, secured French recognition and military alliance in 1778. The alliance brought more than soldiers. It brought a navy. The French fleet would prove critical in battles like Yorktown, where Admiral de Grasse's blockade sealed Cornwallis's fate. France was not alone. Spain, eager to curb British power, entered the war in 1779. Though it never formally allied with the United States, Spain attacked British holdings in Florida and the Mississippi Valley, stretching British forces thin. Spanish Governor Bernardo de Galvez became a hero, capturing Baton Rouge, Mobile, and Pensacola. The Dutch, too, offered vital loans and trade access, while their ports became hubs of anti-British commerce. Global commerce and politics, once far from the American struggle, now revolved around it. The war even spilled into the Caribbean, where colonial trade routes and plantations made the region a hotbed of strategic importance. Battles between the French, British, and Spanish fleets raged through the islands, turning sugar ports and harbors into combat zones. The Atlantic world was now fully engulfed. As pressure mounted, voices in Britain began to shift. War fatigue set in. British merchants complained of ruined trade. Parliamentarians demanded answers. The cost of global war against France, Spain, and the rebelling colonies was proving unbearable. After years of battles, both military and diplomatic, peace finally came. In Paris, American envoys negotiated directly with British representatives. The resulting Treaty of Paris, signed in 1783, was more than a peace. It was a triumph. The treaty recognized American independence, granted generous boundaries extending to the Mississippi, and allowed for fishing rights off Newfoundland. It marked not just the end of a war, but the birth of a nation in the eyes of the world. The American Revolution had reshaped the globe. It demonstrated that colonial rebellion could defeat an empire. It inspired movements from France to Haiti, and it forged a new understanding of diplomacy, where ideology, commerce, and geopolitics intertwined. In the air, in the shadows, and across the seas, the revolution was fought by those who never held a musket, but without whom victory would have been impossible. Even as the Treaty of Paris was signed, the revolution's impact was just beginning. In our next section, we'll explore how ordinary people lived through the chaos, how they survived, resisted, rebuilt, and reimagined their world in the midst of revolution. Section 5. Life on the Home Front. Even as the Treaty of Paris was signed, the revolution's impact was just beginning. In our next section, we'll explore how ordinary people lived through the chaos, how they survived, resisted, rebuilt, and reimagined their world in the midst of revolution. For the average American, the revolution was not grand strategy or declarations of independence. It was daily life under siege. It was raising children as battles raged nearby. It was tending crops while neighbors were drafted or fled. The home front bore scars that no battlefield could capture. As soldiers marched off to war, women, children, and the elderly kept communities functioning. They planted and harvested, cared for the sick, and managed family businesses. In towns and cities, people endured shortages of flour, tea, salt, and even paper. Inflation soared, currency became nearly worthless. Barter replaced coin. In patriot strongholds, revolutionary ideals fueled communal action. Neighbors formed local committees to enforce boycotts, expose loyalists, and distribute scarce resources. These committees of safety wielded near-governmental powers, sometimes ensuring order, other times instilling fear. Not all Americans supported the cause. Loyalists, those who sided with Britain, faced suspicion, violence, and exile. Tories, as they were called, had property seized. Some were tarred and feathered. Thousands fled to Canada or Britain. Civil war simmered beneath the broader revolution. Meanwhile, enslaved people faced double jeopardy, caught between warring sides and uncertain futures. Some ran away to British lines, heeding promises of freedom. Others stayed, hoping liberty might follow victory. Many were returned to bondage, despite their sacrifices. Resourcefulness became a virtue. Women organized spinning bees to produce cloth. Church groups collected donations. Newspapers published recipes for substitutes, like molasses instead of sugar. In some regions, makeshift hospitals sprang up in barns and meeting houses. Children matured quickly. Boys served as messengers or drummers. Girls stitched uniforms or helped with wounded. War was everywhere. No family was untouched. Yet even amid hardship, life continued. People married. Babies were born. Farmers sowed fields between skirmishes. Teachers taught in homes. Faith offered comfort. Communities adapted, resisted, and endured. When peace finally came, the scars were evident. But so was the spirit. Veterans returned to rebuild. Women who had led in absence demanded recognition. Families reunited, and in the aftermath, a new question emerged. How would this country, born in fire and sacrifice, live out its ideals? The revolution did not end with the Treaty of Paris. For many, it had only just begun. Now that we've seen the war's impact on daily life, it's time to witness the final turning points. the moments of reckoning and reflection that brought the war to its dramatic close and set the foundation for a new nation. Section 6. A Nation Forged. Now that we've seen the war's impact on daily life, it's time to witness the final turning points, the moments of reckoning and reflection that brought the war to its dramatic close and set the foundation for a new nation. The final chapters of the war were not marked by large-scale battles, but by diplomacy, weariness, and the slow unraveling of British resolve. After the stunning American-French victory at Yorktown in October 1781, the world shifted. Though small skirmishes continued, the defeat at Yorktown broke the political will of many in Britain. Lord North, the British Prime Minister, resigned, and Parliament began reconsidering the cost of continued conflict. For the Americans, however, the war was not officially over. Months passed, supplies were still short, soldiers remained unpaid. Discontent simmered in the ranks, some officers even whispered of mutiny. In 1783, the infamous Newburgh Conspiracy threatened to turn revolutionary ideals into authoritarian reality. It was George Washington who quelled the storm, not with force, but humility. Appearing before his officers, he read a letter from Congress, then paused, fumbling for his glasses. "Gentlemen," he said softly, "you must pardon me. I have grown not only grey, but almost blind in the service of my country." Tears followed. The rebellion within the revolution dissolved. Meanwhile, in Paris, American diplomats Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay negotiated the terms of peace. They played a careful game, balancing French expectations while advancing American interests. The resulting Treaty of Paris was signed on September 3, 1783. Its terms were remarkably generous. Britain recognized American independence and ceded territory extending to the Mississippi River. Fishing rights were granted off Newfoundland. Debts were acknowledged, and property was to be restored to Loyalists. But the real victory was symbolic. A nation, once seen as an unruly collection of colonies, now stood recognized by one of the world's greatest empires. British soldiers departed from New York City in November 1783. Washington entered triumphantly. A few weeks later, in Annapolis, he did something revolutionary. He resigned. Rather than seize power, he returned to civilian life, proving that America would not trade one monarch for another. The revolution's aftermath was complex. The Articles of Confederation, the new nation's first framework of government, proved weak. States quarreled. Economies faltered. But the ideals born of war, liberty, representation, justice, remained. In 1787, the Constitutional Convention convened. Out of debate and disagreement came a bold experiment. A republic with checks and balances, a Bill of Rights, and power derived from the people. For many, the war's promises remained unfulfilled. Women who had led homes and war efforts were denied political voice. African Americans who fought for freedom often returned to bondage. Native peoples lost lands and autonomy. And yet, the revolution planted seeds. Seeds that abolitionists, suffragettes, civil rights leaders, and countless others would nurture. Its founding contradictions did not diminish its influence. They demanded a reckoning. The Revolutionary War was not just a fight for independence, it was a crucible, a trial of ideals, sacrifice, and imagination. In fire, blood, and hope, a nation was born. And from that birth, an ongoing journey began. As we conclude our exploration of the American Revolution, we prepare to move forward through time, towards civil wars, world wars, and new battles for freedom.